Distinguished guests, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure and privilege to be an integral part of this interesting and exciting summit. It's an extraordinary time in the world to look at sustainability. We have seen the reflection since the year beginning. The world at large is reeling under pressure. The stock markets are down. It's an absolute carnage. Whether it is advanced economies or developing economies, whether it's NASDAQ or Dow Jones or S&Ps or Paris CAC or Qatar Exchange or Shanghai or Nikkei in Japan, extraordinary set of downturn. Commodities, we've seen the reflection in the oil price, an extraordinary downturn in terms of oil or gas or petrochemicals. Currencies are reeling under pressure. But for dollar index is today 99 basis points, whether it is pound or euro or yuan or Japanese yen. They're all going through extraordinary downturn. What does it mean to global sustainability? Why it's happening? Even after 7 years of global financial crisis, we haven't fixed the global sustainability. G7 has become G8, G8 has become G20. The policymakers are coming together. Politics and economics still needs to be converged in real order. When we realized in 2008, Lehman Brothers collapsed and Bastion was bought over by JP Morgan, we realized it was a liquidity issue. Liquidity crisis moved into a funding crisis moved into a solvency and sovereign issue. The solution was collectively accepted. We will start printing money by improving the liquidity. So Federal Reserve started. Trillions of dollars were put into open market operations. The hot money was transcending borders. The asset price deflation, especially in the housing market, was coming up. It started moving into asset price inflation. The stock markets were picking up, housing market was recovering. The quantitative easing, what we call, has worked. If America can print money, European Central Bank can print money as well. ECB has realized they have to inflate the enlarged euro. They started printing money as well. UK, British pound was pumped in trillions to inflate United Kingdom. The reflection of quantitative easing visibly as an accommodative tool was realized world over, and Japan is not an exception. They have invented Abenomics to pull out technically an economy which was under recession for over 30 years. They started getting into open market operations by printing trillions of yen. The currency was weakened, export-driven. Japan was picking up. Virtually, accommodative monetary policy visibly inflating the world. The global growth was set to momentum. Financial economies are converting as real. Real economies are also realizing they have a role to play. They have to redefine their scope and performance, and they started improving. The incremental growth over 60 to 65% came out of the emerging markets, developing economies. Whether it is Russia or China, India or Brussels, so-called BRICS started playing their bigger role. That was the telling story for us to realize way back in 2008 to 10, the world at large is coming up. But when you look at today's condition, 2016, is the global growth is sustainable? The answer is no. IMF, International Monetary Fund, which predicts the annual forecast twice in a year, one in October, another one in spring meeting in Washington in April, May, started forecasting a positive dictum. But reality remains our growth, global growth today, is less than 2009. What does it tell you? It tells you the Millennium Development Goals, which we set in as a concerted vision to pull out the global poverty elimination, gender equality, universal health care, universal education, environment sustainability, were not achieved. That's precisely the reason the Millennium Development Goal has moved into a Sustainable Development Goal, as good as in the year beginning by United Nations. 192 countries have endorsed a bigger agenda recognizing global warming and climate change is going to be a bigger issue. We are seeing the reflection in the current climate as well in Doha. It is colder than London as we speak. Food security or poverty elimination or global warming and climate change are not inseparable. They are interconnected, intertwined. It's not economics, it's economics. Convergence of ecology and econometrics can sustain. That's the starting point. If liquidity crisis can be fixed, the world at large should have been having an ascending trend in terms of global growth. Not happened. America has realized their economy is moving in the right direction. Printing money, improving the liquidity has contributed for their housing market. The housing market was recovering. Unemployment was coming down. Jobless claims were less. They also realized purchasing power parity is improving. The stock markets were improving. So, they stopped printing money in June 2014. The question remains, can they sustain again their growth as they envisaged? Do they have a sustainable economic momentum to see through a performing economy? The answer is no. It's a premature recognition that economy is moving in the right direction, and they started setting the tone for raising the interest rate. They said it, they did it last year, December. They started increasing the interest rate. The interest rate hike was prematurely conceived. Today, we are seeing the whole reflection in the financial markets. Financial markets are highly volatile. I gave an example. Its stock market, its currency market, its bond market, its property market are all gambling grounds today. Extraordinary set of speculation. When people ask me, many a time, why the oil price is down, it's not a demand and supply alone. When the oil price was costing $147, it is not the supply and demand alone. It is the oil futures which were contributing for the significant hike in the price. When dollar is weak, you hedge the risk by buying commodity futures. You map the risk by buying commodity futures, and that was the reason why the oil price was over $100. 17 consecutive years, we have seen a boom in reflection of oil price. It's good for the Gulf economies. Nothing has distracted either supply or demand to have significant downturn to have the current status. Brent quoting $32 and New Mexico US crude is less than $30 today as we speak. It has marginally increased or decreased, both demand and supply. There is a supply glut. The demand has regressed very marginally. Alternates are being contemplated as an option, whether it is solar or biofuel, biomass or wind. Those are options being contemplated to substitute the fossil fuels. Nothing wrong in it. But nothing indicates in clear terms the world at large is sustaining its credibility for global performance. That's the reality. If America is still uneven or volatile in terms of economic fundamentals, what about Europe? Europe has to inflate. They have to improve the liquidity. They started pumping money. ECB, European Central Bank, started printing money. They recognize they have to have enlarged Europe in terms of fiscal and monetary consolidation. Accommodative monetary policy enable the enlarged Europe as a single currency to have more liquidity. But a fiscal consolidation is not achieved. Why? As Euro is a federation, the monetary policy is centralized, fiscal policy is decentralized. Respective countries have their own budget frameworks, and excessive expenditure over income doesn't give them enough room for them to consolidate. The current account deficit, the fiscal deficit, and the gross debt to GDP was widening, and nobody has complied with the Maastricht criteria. That's Europe. It's still under pressure, extraordinary pressure. Can they raise the interest rate? The answer is a firm no. They are going to pump additional liquidity to improve the economy. They want to inflate further. Otherwise, it will get into a risk of deflation. Is it reflation or recession? Is the world is technically under recession? Is it going to contract? Possibly yes. Possibly yes. That's the reality. United Kingdom was spelling time and again they will raise the interest rate in 2014 and 15. Now they are keeping quiet. They know the global growth is an integral part of their own economic momentum. What's happening in one part of the world resonates in the rest of the world. Japan has said it in clear terms. They are going to pump additional money. They are going to have open market operations pumping enough liquidity to inflate Japanese economy. Otherwise, they can't pull out Japan from the negative growth. That's why yesterday they were talking about negative interest. That's accommodative again. These are artificial administration. Currency is a barometer. You don't artificially administer. The minute you start administering a currency, you are manipulating. That's the world today. It's important before we realize what is green banking or environment sustainability, what's happening in terms of global sustainability. It's imperative on our part to recognize all this reflection, all these global powers, their accommodative policies have got direct reflection in the Gulf economies. The enlarged global growth will come only if there is homogeneity in terms of monetary policy or fiscal prudence. When you have divergence in terms of monetary policy, you cannot pull out the world in terms of global sustainability. What's happening in the Gulf is food for thought. Prior to the oil price regression, the 6 states put together, they were producing gross domestic product not less than $1.8 to $1.9 trillion. Current account as a surplus, as a percentage of GDP, is over 30%. Imagine the affluence. Today, it's a contraction. Oil price, many countries have taken their own budget framework. In terms of fiscal makeup, they have taken between $40 to $45. Qatar has taken at $48. If you look at the reflection in terms of the GDP, it is 1.3 trillion. $500 billion has come down. Qatar, for the first time, in the last 16 years, first time reporting a contraction in terms of current accounts. The rest of the states, again, is not going to run in either fiscal surplus or current account surplus. They are going to have fiscal deficit, current account deficit. The growth is, in aggregate terms, is not more than 3 to 3.5%. Qatar can hold 4.3% this year. Does it mean these are not stable and functional? The answer is no. They are stable. Why? Tonight I'm running a session, Growing Opportunities in Qatar. When 2008, when the world was visibly under stress, we showcase, in terms of underlying economics, what Qatar is going to propel. We look at the macroeconomic terms and see what sort of aggregate progression possible for the next 5 years. It was true and fair. And Qatar has performed. Today's position, if you look at Qatar economy, we have to recognize the monetized surplus, which has been conserved as a resource, and also the forex reserves we have can sustain not less than 4 years. So it's not gloom and doom. Take it from me. Qatar can withstand the current oil price with the existing reserves as well as monetized base not less than 4 years. Saudi can take it for 30 months. Oman can take it for 5 months. So it's not that everything is gloom and doom. It's a commodity-driven economy. The oil price also cannot be at this rate for the global economy to sustain its pressure. We have to recognize already there are 14 to 15 countries is in downturn, extraordinary downturn. Oil cannot reach a break-even for global prosperity or global sustainability less than $50. Qatar can withstand for 4 years at the current rate. How many economies can withstand? We have to realize trillions of dollars which should have been invested in modernizing the oil plants and also refinery backup have not been invested over the last 3 years. So definitely there will be glut in terms of supply as well as demand. In short terms, medium and long terms, you will have recovery in store. The reflection you will find in 6 months' time, the oil price will have minimum of $40, maximum of $45. Medium and long term, perhaps it will pull through. The transition will be between 60 to 65, never perhaps over $100. That's the global scene in terms of sustainability. What does it mean to you in terms of economic momentum or economics? The subject of today's discussion, green banking. If you don't understand the dynamics of the backdrop of what I said, perhaps what I'm going to say will not make any sense. That's precisely the reason why I gave the precedence, what exactly happening in terms of global sustainability for you to understand banking, or rather green banking sustainability. I saw Mr. Safar's extraordinary presentation. But we have to realize global warming and climate change is not an ordinary issue. Rising sea levels, increasing temperature, animal extinction are not ordinary issues. We have to realize the world at large putting the future generation at stake. Sustainability, the word sustainability has got a profound professional sense. Without compromising the current economic momentum, we have to create a better world. That's what is the need of the hour. We have to make sure our children and grandchildren are well off than what we are. We have to create a better world. If that is the case, then we have to recognize green banking is a tool. If you recognize the global Productivity is around 54 to 55 trillion dollars as we speak, as a global GDP. The amount of lending or investments done by the bankers around the world is double of the GDP always. For example, last year Qatar has done 10.8% asset expansion banking system, while the GDP is nearing 5%, 4.7%. So it's generally it is double. Banking system, if you recognize, if they are going to generate over 100 trillion a year as lending or investments, that's an opportunity for you to recognize. That is precisely the reason why we have to understand whether you lend or invest as a corporate, socially responsible corporate citizenship. You have to lend it for purpose which are going to have environment sustainability. Whether it is water management or waste management, whether it is small and medium-sized entrepreneurs who are engaged in this business, whether it is water conservation or creating renewables for which you need to support, either through lending or investments, you have to necessarily make sure your lending or investments as a banker is channelized for this purpose. That's a good commercial model. It's not a charity. Make no mistakes. These are tested and proven business models where it can generate. While we can lend for oil and gas company, QP knows that we are the prime bankers for QP. We also declared 15 years before, Doha Bank is a green bank. We also declared Doha Bank is consciously, socially responsible bank. We believed in healthcare. We believed in knowledge management and education. That's precisely the reason I'm standing here. We don't spare a single opportunity for us to share the knowledge. We have to believe the whole economics today's changing world, whether you run a private enterprise or a private bank or a local bank, it is global, it is public. Why? More than the shareholders' money, it is public deposit at stake when it comes to recognition of the fund which you have, which you are allowed to invest or lend. So in substance, it is public, it is global in recognizing that you have a socially responsible mission. That's why you have regulators. That's why you have central bank. The change in face of the world today from globalization to re-regulation, what was once called deregulation has become re-regulation because bankers have failed in their responsibility. When the financial crisis was visibly showcased, we realized bankers lost their trust. The financial engineering has gone beyond definition. It started with the investment banks, with the structured notes, and they transcended the infection around the world and defrauded the world. It was defeating common man. Investments. That's why re-regulation. Re-regulation was required to recognize that consumer is important. What you charge to the ordinary man on the street is very important. That's why credit card companies were put to test. They have been put restrictions how to lend or invest. That's the changing face of the financial service. That's why in-market acquisition was happening. Economic value addition advantage was recognized. Restrictions on lending was put in. A restriction on debt servicing capacity. I can't have responsibility unless I make sure I lend money responsibly and he has got capacity to service the debt. It's not that I have to put you in a debt trap and you can't pay and you team and lend. Teaming and lending takes place and you keep on shunting between one bank to another bank. That's not ethical. That's not moral. Responsible citizenship is all about creating values to society. Socially conscious banking. That is green banking. Green doesn't mean the color alone, the logo alone. What we need to articulate is, how do we create social responsibility as an enterprise? How do we create public-private partnership as an enterprise? How do we promote small and medium-sized entrepreneurs to make sure social entrepreneurship comes in? Small and medium-sized entrepreneurs are mushrooming to make sure that's a backbone for employment or growth for an economy. How do we make sure we price it or lend or invest ethically and morally? How do we make sure we create value systems which are going to have sustainability in terms of economic momentum? Are we lending to small and medium-sized entrepreneurs? Are we working with the government to ensure public-private partnership models are created? Are we lending for climate financing? Are we lending money or creating an investment as a green tech fund to ensure the fund mobilized from the public is invested on value-driven projects which are going to be economically enriching, at the same time environmentally it is meaningful? That's why climate change financing. The climate change financing can come for the consumers, climate change financing can come for the dealers, it can come for the society at large, or the suppliers who are supplying the equipments, whether it is water management or waste management. It's important that bankers have got a role to play to recognize a portion of their risk-weighted capital. We don't need to throw all our money for waste management or water management. First of all, it is a good commercial model. My hypothesis, my conception, when I got doctorate on this, is to recognize a risk-weighted portion. You have international norms as a benchmark set in. Now we call it as Basel. A portion of the risk-weighted capital, say 10% of your capital, risk-weighted capital, should be allocated for these projects. It could be solar, it could be wind, it could be biofuel, it could be biomass, it could be water recycling, it could be waste management. We need to do that. Why? This is going to give sustainable economics for the economy. United Nations in their framework has set in a committed missions as a compliance architecture. What should be the pattern on which you should lend or invest when it comes to clean development mechanism? When you recognize that countries' resources are enriched by oil and gas, in the very same place we go back and say we are going to be a green banker, it is mapping the risk, measuring the risk, managing the risk to make sure Qatar has got sustainable living for generations to come. That is why the clean development mechanism is important as set in. World over, universal benchmark has been set in by compliance architecture, whether it's Kyoto Protocol, or again, it was in 2009 in Bali, 2010 in Mexico, Cancun, then in Durban, then in Qatar, 2012, COP18, then it was in Warsaw, Poland, COP19, then Peru, then COP21, Paris, as good as last December. This compliance architecture is to be converged in terms of policies and politics and economics to create a better world. I'm glad in COP21, resounding decisions. Doha Climate Gateway was set in 2012 as COP18, and I was a party to it. Doha Bank is a party to it. Because we pronounced 15 years before, this bank will be resetting its button, going in the right direction as a socially responsible citizen. And some of the decisions which we have taken, converting the entire retail space to a paperless bank, using automation as a tool, measuring and managing and making sure paperless momentum comes in your workflow automations. We created a tool called Doha Souk. Hundreds of customers today are part of the Doha Souk, where buyers and sellers can come in an electronic marketplace. They don't need to step out to buy a pizza The home delivery was possible and also you have log to track what you do in terms of purchases. You can track it through logging systems. E-commerce was invented, first of its kind, in the region. Doha souk was a tremendous success even today. There's a digital marketplace to pronounce. And customers get the convenience. Integrating all the value systems, whether it's SMS banking or web banking, mobile banking, GPRS, bank on wheel, these are all, prime mover was Doha Bank. As a practitioner, I'm telling you not to self-adulate an institution. But the fact remains, solution is within us to create an environment, and every individual or institutions can create better productivity. If you recognize the seriousness of what Mr. Safar has mentioned, the tons of waste which we are generating within the 11,943 square kilometers, you will recognize what you need to do as individual or institutions, or as a country. COP21 was an eye-opener. Extraordinary set of decisions were taken to see Solar Council was invented. Whether a developing country or developed countries, they all have got together and they resolve an issue which today, if you look at the global scene, China is polluting the maximum. 27% of the global emission with 9.6 billion tons. The second is United States with 5.6, 15% of the global emission. Then comes Europe, 10%, 3.6 billion tons. Then comes India, fourth, 2.7 billion tons. These are not ordinary issues. How can you sustain your economics unless you create a carbon neutral society? How do you make sure you inhale or exhale oxygen which is not going to endanger your solvency unless you create and offset these carbon emissions by creating a process, industrial or otherwise, unless you recognize this. That's why renewable came in. Today, if you look at the growth in terms of renewables, oil-producing countries are engaged in renewables. That's why Qatar has got billions of dollars of investments on the photovoltaic systems. Masraf Rayan has funded it. Extraordinary set of Gulf governance towards renewables. It is solar, it is arid zone, 365 days sunshine. You can always make it commercially viable. It is a good commercial model. Wind, again, it is a commercial model in the Gulf states. We have to recognize these opportunities. Masdar City was invented with 19 billion committed investments in Abu Dhabi. They are also in circular motion to create a society which will create carbon neutral process. So the solution is within us to recognize that extraordinary set of decisions are required to see we understand the dynamics of these changes. Qatar's economic sustainability is contingent on Ministry of Environment. Unless you create a carbon neutral society, unless you conserve water, we pumped over 2.2 billion riyals rather, as good as in September last year, to support the water conservation. We support the small and medium-sized entrepreneurs who are engaged in water management or waste management. We support the small entrepreneurs for solar systems. We support the small entrepreneurs in terms of incubation or seed capital, or with Qatar Development Bank, we come together to have joint risk participation, partially guaranteed. These are initiatives which are responsive to see Qatar is stable and functional in real order. To sum it up, in terms of changing world, we need to recognize the world at large has a collective responsibility to eliminate extreme poverty. The world at large has to fix the food security. Today's population is 6.8 billion. By 2050, it will be 9.1 billion people in this planet. Today, 76 countries, 700 million people are living below the poverty line. They don't have anything to eat. Who owns? We owe the responsibility. We are accountable for this as a society, as humanity. Human dignity is important. So, climate change has got direct impact on the food security. Global warming has got direct impact on the society. Poverty has got direct reflection on the global warming. Unless you sustain, and unless you map these issues into business process, either through banking or otherwise, unless you create a public-private partnership to working with ministries like this, we cannot eliminate extreme poverty. We cannot give food security. We cannot have an environment which is going to give you enduring values for your children and grandchildren. So, there is a collective responsibility to understand it's a shared vision, shared leadership, shared commitment as humans. And that's the need of the hour. We also have to recognize the women participation in the governance of the world today. And they need to be empowered in recognizing socially responsible committed missions, and empowerment to women in terms of governance is equally important for us to see through value systems which are second to none. They are good contributors for the environment, whether it is a garden waste, whether it is paper or plastics. They need to be recycled, reducing these carbon emissions, reusing it at times to have methane getting contraction in terms of overall growth. These are not ordinary issues. Unless you have environmental sustainability, the economic conditions in the world today will be replicated, and that's not good. You don't want to have an economics which is uneven. You want to have a society which dignifies human prosperity. You want to make sure your children and grandchildren are well off. You want to make sure you live in a society which is civilized and decent enough to see when you pass out from this planet, you are well off and you are ensuring your children and grandchildren are well off. That's what is green banking. That is what is sustainability. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your kind attention.